This is Tuesdays with Ted. That's me. And I'm sharing with you everything that I know in hopes that you can elevate your life. Hi guys, it's Ted and we are doing Tuesdays with Ted again. We've been doing this since January. It's now May 9th and today we are talking about nutrition. So we've been going through this idea that I've come up with in my head called conscious endurance. And conscious endurance to me essentially means, how do I live? What are the steps that I take in my life to live what I believe is a great life? Right? I have fun, I'm healthy, I do all the things that I love to do, simply. But what are those things and how do we do it? So we've been going through this the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 7 weeks, and today we are on nutrition. So I posted yesterday and I asked people if they had any questions, and we did get a few questions. But before we get to the questions, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my story. And by the way, this is a dialogue. As far as I'm concerned, it's all about us interacting. How can I help you? How can you help somebody else? And how can we help ourselves, essentially, right? So I'm fascinated with the science of nutrition because I totally believe that it's going to change the way we live and breathe. And you see a few little things out there like, oh, hey, science, the nutrition of science or science of nutrition, and something called nutrigenomics or nutrigenomics or something like that, which is essentially how your genes are expressed based on the food that you eat. So it's a very new science. By the way, nutrition in general, nutrition in general is very new. So it's maybe 30, 40 years old, max, right? So we haven't really been learning that much about nutrition and the science behind nutrition for that long. Hey Sid, how's it going? Charlie, Billy, what's going on, guys? Bob Modica out in New York there, how are you? So anyway, I wanted to start with a big macro view of nutrition. So essentially you have these what would be called macronutrients: fat, protein, carbohydrates. So we need those to live. There's also micronutrients, and micronutrients help you live even better. So you can't live without protein, you can't live without fat, and you can't live without carbohydrates. Most people have a really hard time, easy for you to say, that's right, Bob. Most people have a really hard time with diet and what they're eating and how they're eating. And I consider myself lucky not only because I live in Southern California and so many people are healthy and always thinking about health, but even when I was living in New York 25 years ago, I just moved a little while ago, still looking young, but I was eating salads back then and trying to get my veggies back then, although I was, drinking in a big mess and having loads of sugar and dessert and ice cream and all that sort of stuff, which I don't do nearly as much anymore. But from a macro standpoint, you ultimately want to have a good balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Now, I personally believe that for me what works, and I'm going to get into this in a moment, for me what's worked is a higher fat intake, a moderate protein intake, and a much lower carbohydrate intake. So on a daily, so I was chatting with somebody last week, and she said, oh yeah, this is a woman who was from France, and she said, oh, I just heard about this, like fat is good now, and fat got a bad rap way back in the 60s because, and this is totally crazy, but you can for sure Google it, these researchers from Harvard were paid to lie, essentially. It's totally true. They were paid to lie and basically make fat look like the bad guy, and sugar was supposed to be the good person. And just Google research, Harvard researchers paid to make sugar look good. The sugar industry paid these guys. So it was back then when this whole movement went to this fat-free or low fat because they made fat the culprit. Well, good fats like avocado, olive oil, and nuts and seeds, all those things are actually really good for you. So there's no reason to stay away from healthy fats. So for me, that's worked for me, and I'm going to get into a little bit how I got there. By the way, if during this whole thing any questions come up, definitely feel free. Hey, Alicia, miss you too. Definitely feel free to throw them out there, and I'll do my best to answer them. And like I said, I have a few questions from people who've already asked a few questions. So let's see, Lacey Marie, I'm on the fat journey right now, doing research as fats and experimenting with my diet, which is great. So just to kind of get right into this, so so I'm 46, for those of you that don't know, and when I turned 40, I thought, okay, I should really check, get my blood work now, because I was always an athlete and always relatively healthy. Never saw the doctor, 20 years, never had weight problems, never had, just kind of did my thing and had fun and lived my life. And every so often I'd get a cold once a year. I never needed to see a doctor. So did my stuff, but then I turned 40 and I thought, I should check my blood, because my mom died of a heart attack and my dad died of also a heart attack, and so I thought maybe I should just see what's going on there. Maybe I have some genetic history, and my little brother, who was watching a moment ago, I don't know if he's still there, but he was diagnosed with cancer, so there's some stuff going on, right? And he's fine now, by the way. He's a good brother. I love him. Sometimes he can be a pain in my tush, but that's a different story. So anyway, so what I did when I got this blood work done, it took me a couple of years to finally commit and get vulnerable and basically say, okay, I'm going to get my blood work done, and I'm going to look at what could possibly be wrong, because it doesn't lie. Like, your blood work doesn't lie. You can look healthy and you can be very unhealthy, and I learned this actually. So I got this blood work done, I think I was 42 or 43, and I learned that I had some insulin resistance. So for those of you that don't know what insulin resistance is, it's basically, it's being resistant to the production of insulin. So your pancreas secretes insulin, and when your pancreas, when you give it carbohydrates or you eat something, your blood sugar raises. The pancreas secretes insulin to stabilize your blood sugar. If your blood sugar goes too low, you can go into what's called a diabetic coma. So a lot of people with type 1, there's type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is typically genetic. It's something you're born with. It's not something that a bad diet helps you get. Whereas diabetes type 2 is something that you can avoid from lifestyle decisions, right? So I actually happen to be working with an organization. They're riding their bikes. Sid, who was there earlier, I'm not sure if he's still there, but they're riding their bicycles from New York to Los Angeles, to San Francisco, sorry, I'm in LA. But they're all type 1 diabetics. So they have to be super Sid. So they have to be super careful about their blood sugar. So they have monitors, and then they just make sure that their blood sugar, because if it goes too low or too high, it's bad news. But it's bad news for everyone if it goes, you're welcome, Sid, if it goes too low or too high. So what I want to make sure that people understand is that on a regular basis, science shows that your pancreas, your body can handle about 50 to 60, some people will say 70 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So if you look at professional cyclists, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get as much carbohydrates in, because they're burning that as fuel. And in life, we walk around, we burn fuel, and in the form of carbohydrates and glucose, right? So that turns into glucose and helps you fuel your brain and helps you continue. Well, turns out you don't necessarily need all those carbohydrates. You can burn fat as fuel. It takes an extra step because you're oxidizing the fat, but then that gives off ketones, which then fuel your brain, if you're in a state of what's called ketosis. But ultimately, you don't need nearly as much carbohydrates as most of us get. How do you get carbohydrates? You get them from sugary drinks like soda, iced tea. You get them from anything with sugar. That's a carbohydrate. The big umbrella is carbohydrate. Really, it's there's so many: sweet potatoes, rice, pasta, bread. But there's carbohydrates in broccoli. There's carbohydrates in cauliflower. There's a little bit in berries. Fruit, by the way, like mango, has like 20 grams per serving of carbohydrates, which is high. A banana. So here's what I used to do. I would wake up in the morning, have a nice little cup of tea, some green tea, and then I'd have a meal before I would go for a run. My meal would be some oatmeal and a banana. That bowl of oatmeal has 30 grams of carbohydrates. The banana has 34 grams of carbohydrates. Now let's just say I sweetened my tea a little bit with, let's say, 1 sugar, because that's all I needed in my tea. Then that would already be 70 grams of carbohydrates, which is too much for your pancreas to handle in one sitting. Then I would go exercise, and before my exercise, let's just say I was going for a 2-hour bike ride or a 2-hour run, I would then have a pre-energizer workout drink, which are very popular nowadays. And the one I was taking had about 15 or 16 grams of carbohydrates and probably a little bit less of real sugar. But you have to just think of carbs as a total number for the moment. So now I'm already up to 84, 85. Then let's say an hour into my exercise, I suck down a gel, which has another 27 grams. So now I'm already at like 120 grams. Then I come back and I have a recovery drink and then a protein shake with another banana inside. So there's another 100 grams there. And then all of a sudden, in the first 2 or 3 hours of the morning, I'm having 300 grams of carbohydrates in the form of what I think is good, healthy stuff. But ultimately, what's happening is it's putting too much pressure on my pancreas. So my pancreas then becomes the body becomes resistant to the insulin that secretes. So in other words, normal, quote unquote, normal folks who have a normal functioning pancreas and eat in a normal fashion, they eat some food, the blood sugar goes up. The pancreas secretes insulin, it stabilizes the blood sugar, everything goes back to normal. So you've experienced this, I'm sure, if you had dessert. So let's say you didn't really eat breakfast one day, and then you went to a brunch or something, or you went to your kid's birthday or something like that, and you just happen to have a cupcake. You get the jitters, you get the shakes. It's because your blood sugar went through the roof, right? That is actually what is happening when your blood sugar goes through the roof. And it's really, really important to be sensitive to that, to be aware of that, because that's the only way you're gonna understand how to fix it and how to feel it. If you're a type 1 person, like our good friends, they actually have what's called Dexcom, which is a mechanism that has an app that Bluetooths that shows them every 5 minutes. It gives them data on what their blood sugar is, so they can see as it starts to trend down a little bit, they need to take something to stabilize it, or if it goes up too much, they need to back off and they need to see if they can get it down. But you know, folks like that have quote unquote normal functioning pancreas don't have that. So we have to be aware and we have to be a little bit more sensitive, and most of it just comes from paying attention to actually what you're eating. So some general guidelines. And again, by the way, let's see, doesn't Stephen Epstein, doesn't exercise make the cells of the body more permeable to sugar, not even needing insulin to absorb? So exercise helps you become less insulin resistant, Stephen, for sure. So exercise is, if it turns out you are insulin resistant, exercise is for sure your prescription, one of them, obviously, besides changing your diet. I'm not exactly sure. You may be right about that, that it makes the cells of the body more permeable. I'm not exactly sure. Isn't that why diabetics should exercise more? That's a good question. I learned through my experience actually that 1/3 of diabetics, and now we're talking about type 2 diabetics, 1/3 are actually what they call thin diabetics. So if you look at guys like Timothy Noakes he wrote a book called The Lore of Running years ago. Here we go. Sid's like the master guy. So he says active GLUT4 receptors help with that. I'm not exactly sure. So is that, Sid, is that something that you can actually buy? Like, you buy? Thanks, Tim. Good explanation. Greetings from Power Bar. Yes, greetings from Power Bar. So Power Bar, actually, they have recently started carrying, and Tim, are your products available in the US? So Tim, I met he works at Power Bar, and we met over in Spain, and they, because I work with the BMC cycling team, and they sponsor the BMC cycling team, Power Bar does, and some of their products are now low carb, because we actually chatted, and now people are starting to understand that you need really just kind of protein and fat and a little bit of carbs, not so much. So hopefully he'll answer that. But check out Power Bar if you wanted to find some of the low, but make sure it's the low carb stuff. At least that's my that's my recommendation. Sorry, Tim. So anyway, so back to the whole kind of macro thing. So we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. When I got my blood results back and I was told that I was insulin resistant, I had to search more into this, and I found Mark Sisson, who wrote the Primal Blueprint, and he turns out he's a friend, and he comes to my yoga studio, and his wife I've known for a long time through our good friend Tony Horton, because they've known each other for a long time, so that's how we met. But he basically is all over the low carb, moderate protein, high fat. He calls it a fat burning beast. Okay, so here's Tim's answer. Tim, America and Europe have different products, but normally they have them in the US. So if you're the kind of person who wants to lower your carbohydrate and sugar intake, but you still want to fuel with something like a Power Bar, then look for, because I know this year they have, and it might be 2 years old, but I know for sure they have those products. So lower carb products. So anyway, so back to the Mark Sisson and the Primal Blueprint. So I talked to him. I said, hey, I found out I was insulin resistant, and what should I do? And of course he was like, well, welcome to the club, Ted. This is how we all get there, because we realize that what we've been doing for such a long period of time, like carb loading, for instance, hasn't really worked. Now, it's different if you're a professional athlete and you're, humping and like there's burning these calories like they're going out of style. Then it's okay, because you're not exactly, you're not in jeopardy of overstimulating the pancreas. All right. Jeff is asking, what percentage of your diet should be carbohydrates? So, good question, Jeff. You're leading me to my next point. So, what I do is I kind of follow Mark Sisson's primal little triangle he has. So, excuse me. So basically, it's if you're 50 grams. I don't know if it comes from him or it comes from The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, which is a great book by Doctors Volek and Finney. They also wrote a book called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, for those of you that are endurance athletes or just a normal athlete. You don't have to be an endurance athlete. But essentially, the idea is 50 grams of carbohydrates in a day or under puts you in a state of ketosis. And so Mark Sisson's little chart is, if you're between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrates, you're in what he calls, a fun little bug, what he calls weight loss. And then from 100 to 150 grams, he calls maintenance. Okay, so that's kind of his thing. So I basically, for me, I try to stay on about, whatever. I don't think I'm dropping into ketosis that much right now. I try to stay between 75 and 150 grams of carbohydrates, and that's total. That's total carbohydrates. So when something says, like for instance, my 85% dark chocolate, this is one of the questions somebody asked. Do you cheat? Jen Jerome. She said, do you cheat? And of course I cheat. I'll have like a couple of bites of a piece of cake if I'm at a party or a wedding or something like that. I'll have maybe a bite or two. Whereas in the past, I'd have ice cream and cake, and I would have no problem having all of it. Plus, I'd have pasta and I'd have sweet potatoes, and it would be too much. But now what I do is at night, I'll have like a half a serving of 85% dark chocolate. We want to go at least 73%. That's the magic number. Apparently, anything over 73% is better for you than the milk chocolate that's there. So I just go, there's this Green and Black's organic 85%, and that's what I have. And I'll have half a serving. So I think in a full serving, there's 12 grams of carbohydrates and 5 grams of sugar. So there's some fiber in there. So basically that's 6 grams of carbohydrates that I add to my full day of my, let's just say 100 as an average, Jeff. So it's not a percentage for me. I do count, you know, and I give myself a rough count, because before I wasn't even thinking about it. I would go in the afternoon and I grab myself a bag of chips. We have these things called Hava chips, and they're great. Corn is just corn chips and salt and oil. That's it. It's basically, I don't know, olive oil or some kind of cooking oil, canola oil, I don't know what it was, and salt, and some lime, and there's lime. They're so good. And I would whack down a whole bag of these Hava chips, and what I learned is that they are 44 grams of carbohydrates. So it's killing me. Like I would have that and like a sweetened iced tea. That is your recipe for disaster as far as your pancreas is concerned, and ultimately that's the plan to get to diabetes if you want it, type 2, obviously. Yeah, ouch is right. And that was a normal thing. And then I'd have a cookie after lunch, and then I'd have an ice cream at night. My wife and I would go out to dinner. We'd each get a dessert, and then we'd share it and go, oh yeah, that's great. Now we mostly don't have a dessert. We're like, let's just go home and have a piece of chocolate. So, but it takes time. This is the interesting thing, is it takes time to train your body. And what I want you guys to understand too, is I want you to understand that you can train your body. So even if you think to yourself right now, because I was at this point where I thought, there's no way I'm ever not gonna have dessert. There's no way I'm ever not gonna have pizza. And I'll never forget the first trip to New York. I went to New York and I was there for, I don't know, 5 days or whatever it was. I'm like, oh my gosh. Hey, Lizzie. I was like, oh my gosh. I just left New York for a week and I did not have one slice of pizza. It blew my mind. I was like a miracle. Since that day, I think I've been back a few times and I haven't had pizza. Maybe I'll have a bite if somebody else is having pizza. But that used to be my go-to. I'm from New York. It's the greatest city in the world, and it's the greatest place. The pizza is amazing there. And I don't even do it anymore. So let's see, Queen Bee. She says big bowl of cereal before bedtime and thought it was normal. That's exactly right. That would be my little snack, you know? I mean, Tony and I, those of you that know Tony Horton, we'd watch like the Laker game or whatever, and we would sit and have a bowl of like ice cream and chocolate chips, and we'd sit there and eat it because we both were just like, well, who cares? We work out so much, it's totally fine, you can burn it off. Well, friends, that's definitely not the case. So, let's just pull back a second here. So from a macro standpoint, carbohydrates, fat, protein. I personally, because of my insulin resistant diagnosis, changed from being a sugar burner to being more of a fat burner. So that means I'm high fat, low carbohydrates, and moderate protein. Now, when you get more into the micronutrients and green leafy vegetables and superfoods and all that sort of stuff, it gets way more intricate. You want ultimately to have as many green leafy vegetables and veggies in general as possible. So there's Darren Olean, who created Shakeology, for those of you that are Beachbody fans. That drink is chock full of all kinds of superfoods. But what's important that I want to say is peanuts as a snack. I would choose, so that's one thing that I do as far as snacks go, are nuts. So I would choose macadamia nuts would probably be the best, then some pecans, then almonds, walnuts. Peanuts aren't exactly, and oh, by the way, I wouldn't worry so much about calories. To me, you used to think a lot about calories. I don't even worry about calories these days. It's all about the kinds, because 100 calories of soda is way different than 100 calories of kale or broccoli, right? So, Lacey saying, how many carbs would you recommend for a type 2 diabetic? Well, Lacey, I would say that it's important I would say you have to be really careful. If you could get them under 150, that would be great. because then you're not going to drop into a state of ketosis, which you have to really manage. So you have to be really careful with that. But ultimately, if you can get them around 100, 150, you'll see amazing changes for sure. And then get them moving, of course. I think that would be a huge thing. But monitor it. If someone's a type 2 diabetic, definitely have a professional monitoring their diet and monitoring their blood glucose levels on a regular basis. And it's easy. You can just get a little prick thing for sure to do it. Actually, I need to do that. I got my urine sticks. That's too much information. So I'm looking at my hydration levels on a regular basis. I test it out there. But anyway, I wanted to go just a little bit more into, you're welcome. I wanted to go a little bit more into sort of so we're talking about high fat, moderate protein, high shell, and low carb diet, which has been working for me. But the most important thing I want you guys all to know, because I usually just go half an hour when I do these, and thank you so much for participating and checking it out and watching, is you're an experiment of one. So once I got my diagnosis, I researched and I talked to people and I found out what was out there and the science behind it and what's working and what am I doing. I didn't even look at labels. I wasn't looking at labels. I was like, oh wow, okay. Now all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, that has 15 grams of carbs and that has 20 grams of carbs and the banana has 34 and the oatmeal has 30 and oh my God. Like, what is going on? And the chips have 44 and my naked juice has 37, but there's 2 servings in that naked juice, so that means it's 74, and I used to like whack them down in one shot. So it's not okay to just not be aware. That's my thing. So Mel, you're asking, I quit pop, how can I have my how can I have my health sugar in drink? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. You quit pop, which is good. I'm happy to hear about that. How can I have my health sugar in a drink? You can, I'm assuming you want like healthy carbohydrates in a drink, and I would say find a good supplement. Something like Shakeology would be fine. Some kind of superfood shake is a good thing to just search for in your area. Obviously, the more organic, the better. But that was one way. But ultimately, I wouldn't really go for sugar in drinks. Fruit smoothie, Alicia says fruit smoothies. That's true, and I would just be careful with not throwing too much fruit in the smoothie. So I went from having a full banana to a half banana to now no bananas. So I used to put in mangoes and blueberries and banana, and there'd be 75 grams of carbs. It's just too much. So anyway, we want to lower the carbohydrate intake. First of all, you got to find out what the heck is going on with you. And it's really your responsibility as an adult, if you made it past 30 years old, to go check it out. So go ahead, especially before all this health insurance stuff starts happening. But go ahead and get some blood work done and check out your if you can get, and I'll put some links as soon as I finish here in there so you can see where I got my blood work done, how you can get yours done, and a couple little resources. Alicia, it was True Health Diagnostics. Jeff, with regards to keto diet and its reliance on high fat, does it matter what kind of fat you ingest? It absolutely does, Jeff. And ultimately, you want healthier fats like avocados and oils and olive oil, and nuts are what I usually do a lot of. Seeds are really good. Chia seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, all things. Salmon is fine. I'm not totally vegetarian. I'm mostly vegetarian, but salmon is fine too. So that's the macro. So what we'll do is maybe we can do a nutrition part 2, because I don't want to go too over. But get your blood work done. Start looking at what you're taking in, and I guarantee you, as you start to shift and you start to change a little bit, you'll notice the weight come off. You'll notice the energy be better. All these things that'll happen when you start to kind of dial in your diet a little bit more. So that's it, you guys. That's 30 minutes for me today. Thank you so much, and feel free to ask more questions. Next week we'll either do a part 2 for nutrition, or we'll go on to our next, which is recovery and yoga. Thanks so much, you guys. I will talk to you soon. Bye.